Welcome to the M.O.W. channel. Today, we delve into the origins of William Dwayne Bell, the perpetrator at the heart of the 2001 Panmure RSA triple murders, a dark chapter in New Zealand's judicial history. This horrific tragedy was not a random occurrence. It was the catastrophic result of a man's troubled early life, the environment he was exposed to, and the deep-seated violence that took root within him. From the moment he was born, Bell's life was shadowed by instability and crime. Please hit the subscribe and like buttons. The case file starts now. A childhood defined by gangs and chaos. William Dwayne Bell was born and raised in M.O.W., a southern suburb of Auckland, in 1978. The socio-economic conditions of this area already provided a backdrop vulnerable to crime and delinquency. However, it was Bell's home life that was the decisive factor in shaping him. His father was a patched member of the M.O.W., one of New Zealand's most notorious gangs. His gang activities led to significant periods of incarceration, which had a fatal impact on young Bell, normalizing crime as an ordinary part of life. Shockingly, his father testified in court that he wanted his son to surpass him and become a bigger criminal, aspiring to join a more powerful gang. This meant that within the family, crime was not merely tolerated, but was presented as a form of aspiration and achievement. Meanwhile, Bell's mother was also involved in Maori vigilante activity and had family ties to the Black Power, another powerful gang. Both of Bell's parents suffered from alcoholism and frequently inflicted extreme violence on each other. The household was far from peaceful and safe. It was a space of violence and chaos. Eventually, the parents divorced when Bell was 7, and the breakup of the family left an irreparable scar on his emotional stability and moral development. It was from this point that Bell began getting involved in petty crime and causing constant trouble. When Bell was 10, his uncle was convicted of manslaughter for fatally stabbing someone while intoxicated in a M.O.W. home. Witnessing the extreme violence and its consequences from a close relative at a young age was an experience that completely unmoored Bell's moral compass. He grew up internalizing the gang's culture of violence and crime as a way of life. A life of delinquency and failed protection. Due to his unstable home environment, Bell was a ward of the state from the age of 9 to 17. But this protection failed. He repeatedly cycled in and out of youth detention centers. His early criminal history began when he was caught by the police for stealing his father's car and driving recklessly downtown. From there, his level of delinquency quickly escalated. Bell became obsessed with stealing cars and soon began committing bold, calculated robberies. He displayed a shameless pattern of targeting the most vulnerable in society, such as robbing rest homes by impersonating security guards or cleaners. When he was 14, he engaged in prostitution and then stole the cars of the men he had sex with. This criminal record demonstrates that his life was not merely a series of accidental slip-ups, but a fixed pattern of exploiting crime to gain profit and exert control. His former social worker testified that the longest period Bell went without causing trouble was only 3 months, confirming that his life was virtually a continuous cycle of crime and institutionalization. Bell also exhibited the peculiar behavior of frequently impersonating a police officer to pull over drivers. This suggested an abnormal obsession with power and control. These acts, borrowing the authority of a uniform to terrorize ordinary citizens and feel superior, revealed his severe antisocial tendencies early on. The violent prelude to murder. Bell's violent nature was dramatically expressed in a 1997 incident when he was 19. After being denied a job at a M.O.W. gas station over marijuana use, Bell decided to vent his rage through violence. He returned with a stolen police baton and brutally attacked the gas station attendant from behind. Bell severely beat the employee and stole the till drawer. Even after the assaulted employee surrendered, told Bell to take the money, and hid in a toilet stall, Bell did not stop the beating. He uttered the chilling, contradictory phrase to the employee, "It's not about the money, I don't want to do this, but I have to." This statement suggested that Bell's motive was not mere financial gain, but the release of rage and violence itself. He continued his violent threats, smashing a hole in the toilet door with the baton, until the employee managed to escape using a chair. For this incident, Bell was sentenced to 5 years and 9 months in prison for aggravated robbery. The presiding judge at the time noted that the robbery was almost secondary to the attack, which nearly led to the employee's death, emphasizing that Bell's primary intent was to inflict violence, not just to rob. Even more disturbingly, after the attack, Bell impersonated a police officer and went to the hospital to intimidate the victim. This action clearly demonstrated his malice, audacity, and complete lack of empathy for the suffering of others. His criminal record, which included over 100 offenses ranging from theft, fraud, unlawful taking of a motor vehicle, robbery, impersonating a police officer, and assault, filled 6 pages of computer printout. William Dwayne Bell's early life was a chronicle of violence and crime, an ominous prelude to the brutal murders in Panmure in 2001. Chapter 2: The Systemic Failure. Viewers, while William Dwayne Bell's early crimes led to his incarceration, his eventual relapse into crime stemmed from more than just personal wickedness. It exposed critical, structural flaws within the New Zealand justice system. In Chapter 2 today, we conduct an in-depth analysis of how Bell was released from prison, how severely the parole management system that returned him to society failed, and how that failure inevitably led to a gruesome tragedy. The dilemma and loopholes of automatic release. Bell served most of his 5-year, 9-month sentence for aggravated robbery at Auckland Prison. At the time in 2001, New Zealand's legal framework dictated that an inmate was automatically released after serving 2/3 of their sentence. This applied even to offenders like Bell, who possessed extreme violent tendencies and a high risk of re-offending. The parole board had no discretion over the decision to release Bell. Its role was limited to setting the conditions he had to follow. Once he was back in the community, this system clearly demonstrated a lack of critical safeguards to deeply assess the danger posed by serious offenders and extend their confinement. In July 2001, Bell was automatically released after completing his term. The parole board formally imposed 5 release conditions intended to prevent recidivism. These conditions included mandatory psychological counseling, participation in alcohol and drug addiction counseling, and the obligation to work in a job approved by his probation officer. These conditions were meant to serve as the bare minimum safety net for Bell's rehabilitation and social reintegration. But the reality proved that this net utterly collapsed. The dysfunction of the M.O.W probation office. Bell was assigned to the M.O.W probation office in South Auckland to monitor his compliance with the release conditions. However, this office was a hotbed of systemic failure. An internal investigation conducted by the Department of Corrections (DOC) after the incident revealed that the M.O.W office suffered from chronic staff shortages, and staff morale was extremely low. Furthermore, the management and supervisory structure was so weak that proper duty performance was impossible. Bell began violating his release conditions almost immediately and severely. He secured a job as a bartender at the Panmure RSA club as part of a work experience program, but he neither reported nor received approval for this job from his probation officer. For Bell, who had a history of defying authority, impersonating police and committing robbery, deceiving the monitoring system was a natural behavior. Despite the fact that none of his 5 release conditions were properly met, the probation office failed to effectively control him or take action to have him re-incarcerated. The extent of this mismanagement was so severe that the Department of Corrections later admitted to making a total of 11 separate mistakes in the process of managing Bell's release. The DOC itself described the situation as a zone of poor management. This suggests that the failure went beyond individual error. The entire public service agency responsible for managing high-risk parolees like Bell was functionally disabled. Ignoring the red flags and warning signs, the systemic failure was further exacerbated by ignoring the clear warning signs presented by Bell's behavior. Just 2 weeks into his employment at the RSA, Bell was fired. His colleagues assessed him as violent, disrespectful, and completely untrustworthy. The manager who fired Bell explicitly warned him never to return to the club. This firing was likely a critical event that instilled a deep sense of humiliation and desire for revenge in Bell. After being fired from the RSA, Bell spiraled out of control. In November of that year, he committed a clear and serious violation of his release conditions by assaulting a woman. This violent crime clearly indicated how dangerous he was to society. Yet the probation officer failed to initiate the procedures to re-imprison him. Despite having the time for legal proceedings to return him to jail, the system remained paralyzed. Crucially, just days before the murders, Bell committed 2 consecutive robberies. He stole items from an engineering company and later robbed cash from another bar. Victims of both robberies immediately provided the police with detailed descriptions, including Bell's address, phone number, and vehicle license plate. This information was crucial evidence that could have led to Bell's immediate arrest. But the police categorized these thefts as low-priority incidents and delayed his apprehension. Every safeguard the police, the probation office, and the parole board failed simultaneously. The probation office failed to monitor him, and the police ignored the signals of his escalating recidivism. Bell was given free rein in a space of unchecked control created by the justice system, allowing him time to select his next victims. Had even one of these warning signs been properly flagged and acted upon, the horrific massacre at the Panmure RSA club on December 8, 2001, could have been prevented. Bell's reoffending was not merely the wickedness of an individual. It was an irreversible tragedy caused by a violent predator unleashed by a negligent state system. Chapter 3: The 45-Minute Massacre. Viewers, the time William Dwayne Bell spent roaming the streets unchecked due to systemic failure finally exploded into an act of extreme violence on the morning of Saturday, December 8, 2001. This was the day 3 innocent lives were brutally extinguished and one person was left permanently disabled at the Panmure RSA club in Auckland, New Zealand. In Chapter 3, we reconstruct the timeline of the gruesome 45-minute rampage and shine a light on the sheer malice displayed by the killer. The eve of the crime and prepared violence. The night before the incident, William Dwayne Bell spent a tumultuous night with Darnell Kelly Toupee, his getaway driver. The two were highly agitated, consuming alcohol and cannabis throughout the night. Bell later admitted to using methamphetamine, a combination of drugs and alcohol that severely confused his already unstable mental state and sent his violence spiraling out of control. Although Bell claimed he blacked out inside the RSA, his actions clearly demonstrate a calculated act of revenge and robbery. Bell returned to the RSA just 2 months after being fired. He arrived with a weapon secretly prepared for the assault. He concealed a stolen shotgun in a guitar case to avoid detection. As he entered the club, even more shocking, Bell was wearing a police shirt during the commission of the crime. This was an extension of his long-standing criminal pattern of impersonating an officer, intending to confuse his victims and bestow a false sense of authority upon his violent actions. Terror inside the club. Murder and torture. The incident occurred around 8:00 a.m. on Saturday morning. Just as the club was opening its doors, getaway driver Toupee waited outside, while Bell entered the club alone. His goal was not simply to steal money. His primary motive was to take revenge on the RSA staff, particularly those who had fired him, and unleash his fury. Bell brutally attacked the club president, a club member, and one staff employee. He murdered 3 victims by shooting them in the chest with the shotgun or by viciously beating them with the butt of the shotgun. Autopsy results revealed that all but one victim died from the extreme beating, not the gunshot, illustrating the extended and cruel period of suffering Bell inflicted on his victims. One victim was shot simply because he tried to be a hero, making it clear that Bell retaliated with extreme violence against any attempt to challenge his authority or resist. During the murders, Bell completely stripped his victims of their personal dignity. He laughed and mocked the fallen victims, relishing his cruelty. "Are you girls crying?" he asked. "And you're going to say I did it?" Trivializing their pain. These statements are chilling evidence that he was not a simple robber, but a person with extreme psychopathic tendencies who derived satisfaction from the fear and suffering of others. A 45-minute rampage and the critically injured survivor. Bell remained inside the RSA for a shocking 45 minutes. This time was divided into 2 phases. The first 15 minutes were spent raiding the cash registers and the safe, netting him about $13,000 in cash. However, the remaining 30 minutes were dedicated not to the robbery, but solely to beating and mocking the victims. Although he expected to get $50,000, the amount he actually stole was far less than anticipated. Despite this, he did not stop the violence. He only took cigarettes, the money he had earned the night before, and cash pilfered from the victims' wallets. The 4th victim, club employee Susan Couch, miraculously survived the horrific massacre, but sustained permanent and severe injuries. She was found covered in blood and near death, having suffered irreparable injuries, including brain damage, due to Bell's violence. Couch was the sole surviving witness, vividly recalling Bell's barbaric actions and mockery. After finishing the slaughter, Bell left the scene and joined his getaway driver, Toupee. He told Toupee, "We are in big trouble for this. We are going to pay big time for this. I killed 3 people," acknowledging his actions. More bizarrely, Bell purchased newspapers featuring the headlines about his crime and kept them in the car. This suggests he possessed a narcissistic tendency, boasting about his heinous crime and reveling in the notoriety it would bring him. These 45 bloody minutes were a moment of shocking violence for New Zealand society, and the time when the absolute evil latent within the man named William Dwayne Bell was fully unleashed. Chapter 4: Justice served a record-breaking sentence. Viewers, following the horrific massacre at the Panmure RSA club, the New Zealand justice system faced the critical task of imposing the appropriate weight of justice upon the perpetrator, William Dwayne Bell. In this chapter, we detail the legal proceedings, the trial process after Bell's arrest, and the record-breaking minimum non-parole period sentence handed down in New Zealand's history. The court battle marked by deception and evasion. William Dwayne Bell was arrested 5 days after the incident at his mother's home, and was soon brought to court. The trial process was riddled with Bell's persistent attempts at deception and avoidance of responsibility. While he admitted to the offense, he tried to dilute his culpability by claiming that others were involved in the murders. The shotgun, which was used in the crime but never found, and the alleged individual who provided him with the police shirt were not charged, a fact Bell tried to use to muddy his criminal intent. Bell's demeanor in court clearly revealed his antisocial tendencies. Although his girlfriend gave birth to his child during the trial, Bell showed no hint of paternal responsibility or the slightest remorse for the victims. He took the stand to testify in his own defense, during which he was caught lying over 64 times in contradiction to the evidence presented by the prosecution. These actions convinced the jury and the judge that he was not genuinely repentant for his crimes, but was only making dishonest attempts to reduce his sentence or evade punishment. The prosecution emphasized that Bell's crime was not a simple, impulsive act of robbery. Prosecutors argued that Bell's initial employment at the RSA was likely part of a long-term robbery plan to scout and understand the club's structure and finances. This was an effort to prove that Bell's actions were carried out with premeditated, malicious intent, psychopathic tendencies, and the discussion of preventive detention. The discussion regarding Bell's mental health status was a significant component of the trial. The investigating officer in the murder case testified that Bell was the nearest to a psychopath of anyone I'd ever come across. The psychological report submitted to the court also vividly demonstrated Bell's dangerousness. It concluded that if Bell were ever released, the risk of him committing further violent offenses was extremely high. The court seriously considered Bell's risk of reoffending, even discussing the possibility of preventive detention. Preventive detention is a measure applied when an offender's dangerousness is so high that it is necessary for public safety, indicating how gravely Bell's violence and irredeemability were assessed. Bell's lack of remorse and repeated lies in court, combined with the psychological report, underpinned the judicial necessity to impose the harshest possible sentence, a record-breaking sentence in New Zealand judicial history. The court ultimately handed down a severe sentence to William Dwayne Bell. The initial sentence was life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 33 years. This was 5 years longer than any minimum non-parole period previously imposed by a New Zealand court at the time. This sentence was a powerful assertion of the judiciary's will, reflecting Bell's extreme cruelty, the risk of recidivism, and the profound depth of suffering he inflicted on the victims. Bell appealed the sentence, and in the Court of Appeal, the minimum non-parole period was reduced from 33 years to 30 years. Although reduced, this 30-year minimum non-parole period still stood as the longest minimum detention period ever imposed in New Zealand at the time. The court discussed the unlikelihood of Bell ever being paroled, even after serving 30 years. Essentially suggesting the possibility that he might spend the rest of his life in prison. In addition to the life sentence, Bell was also sentenced to 13 years for attempted murder and 12 years for aggravated robbery. These two terms were ordered to be served concurrently with the attempted murder sentence, and he was also convicted on a separate charge of stealing $300 from a bar. The accomplice's judgment and controversy over equity. Darnell Kelly Toupee, Bell's getaway driver, was also involved in the incident. Toupee was charged with 3 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of aggravated robbery. The prosecution argued that Toupee was complicit in the robbery plan and knew Bell was entering the club with a gun and that people might get hurt. However, Toupee's defense lawyer sought leniency, claiming he was illiterate and had been duped by Bell. The court sentenced Toupee to 12 years in prison, to be served concurrently with the aggravated robbery term. Toupee received a significantly lighter sentence than Bell and was paroled in 2012. The fact that the accomplice was charged with manslaughter, not murder, and received a relatively lighter sentence reflected the difference between Bell's principal cruelty and Toupee's supporting role, though it did spark controversy over equity given the severity of the case. The minimum non-parole life sentence of 30 years imposed on William Dwayne Bell was the most emphatic warning the New Zealand judiciary could deliver against violent crime. While this record sentence was later surpassed by the non-parole life sentence given to the perpetrator of the 2019 Christchurch terrorist attack, Bell's term symbolically represents the gravity of justice for an event that profoundly shocked New Zealand society. Chapter 5: The Aftermath, the Shadow of Systemic Failure. Viewers, William Dwayne Bell's record-breaking sentence did not signify the end of justice. In Chapter 5, we trace the brutal shadow this horrific event cast over New Zealand society and its justice system, delving into the necessity for system reform, the victims' unending suffering, and the disturbing events that unfolded during the perpetrator's prison life. Accountability for corrections mismanagement. The recidivism and brutal murders committed by William Dwayne Bell stemmed not only from his personal malice, but equally from the clear failure of the state system responsible for managing him. Immediately following the incident, the Department of Corrections launched an internal investigation. The focus was not on blaming Bell for violating his parole conditions, but on the severe dysfunction of the Panmure Probation Office that was tasked with supervising his release. The investigation revealed that the Panmure Probation Office was effectively non-functional due to chronic staff shortages, low morale, and poor managerial oversight. The doc admitted that all of these factors created a structural failure that led to the neglect of Bell's release conditions management. Specifically, the biggest error was the failure to initiate legal proceedings to reincarcerate Bell, despite the fact that he was failing to comply with any of his release conditions. The doc admitted to making a total of 11 separate mistakes in managing Bell's conditions, classifying this as a zone of poor management. This was a public acknowledgement that a state agency had neglected its duty to protect the public. This internal review subsequently sparked a nationwide discussion on reforming New Zealand's parole and probation system. The struggle of Susan Couch and state compensation. Club employee Susan Couch, who miraculously survived Bell's attack, but was left with permanent, severe injuries including brain damage, was the greatest casualty of the system's failure. Her life was completely devastated by the incident, and she has had to endure physical and psychological torment for a lifetime. Couch sought $2 million in damages from the state, asserting that the entire tragedy was a direct result of the Corrections Department's gross negligence. Couch's legal battle was a landmark case that tested the limits of New Zealand's victim compensation scheme and state accountability. It took 11 long years after the attack for the Department of Corrections to finally announce it would offer Susan Couch a $300,000 punitive damage payment. Brian Henry, Couch's lawyer, criticized this amount, pointing out that it amounted to only $10,000 per year over 30 years and was woefully inadequate compared to the suffering and loss endured by the victim. He argued that the appropriate compensation in a negligence suit should have been closer to $10 million, emphasizing that the compensation was insufficient for her recovery. Although the amount was welcomed by victim advocacy groups like the Sensible Sentencing Trust, the Couch case ignited a crucial social debate about the extent of the government's responsibility for damages caused by the clear negligence of state agencies. Couch's struggle highlighted the need for continuous efforts to strengthen compensation frameworks and victim rights in New Zealand. Life inside retribution and continued trouble. William Dwayne Bell was classified as one of New Zealand's most dangerous criminals and was incarcerated for a lengthy term, primarily at Auckland Prison. However, his life behind bars was far from peaceful. On December 10, 2007, Bell was attacked and stabbed in the eye by fellow inmate Dean Joseph Shepherd. Shepherd used the sharpened edge of a file folder to attack Bell's eye. Bell suffered severe injuries, including an orbital fracture and internal bleeding, requiring treatment at an Auckland hospital. Shepherd stated he attacked Bell because the killer had been bragging about his gruesome crimes and demeaning the victims within the prison. This was a form of internal justice, demonstrating that even among hardened criminals, Bell's crime was deemed intolerable. Shepherd was sentenced to an additional 10 years for the attack, but the term was ordered to be served concurrently with his existing sentence, resulting in no actual change to his time served. Bell continued to cause problems even in custody. In 2017, he was charged with watching obscene films in his cell, and in 2020, he received $1,000 in compensation related to an unlawful strip search incident involving over 200 inmates at Auckland Prison in 2016. These incidents underscore both Bell's constant rule-breaking and issues with prison operations. After being fired from a prison kitchen job on suspicion of attempting to take a female guard hostage, Bell appealed the decision against the Department of Corrections. Bell denied the hostage attempt claim. During the appeal, Bell made a rare apology for his crimes, saying he was truly sorry and that his actions were deserving of condemnation in any society. While the sincerity of his apology is debatable, there is a possibility it was a calculated attempt to gain legal leverage. Bell ultimately lost his appeal. The story of William Dwayne Bell is a sobering chronicle of how the trauma left by one man's brutality can linger deep within the nation's systems, the lives of its victims, and the confines of its correctional facilities. That concludes our story for today. Please hit the subscribe and like buttons. We'll be back tomorrow with a new case file. Thank you for watching.